Zen 3's been announced and will be available early next month. Its biggest improvement is to its single-threaded performance. This is felt in games, so it was no surprise that gaming was the focus of the presentation. This is an important moment for AMD, since it erodes the last advantage that Intel was clinging on to. With Zen 3, it looks like AMD has finally gained the edge in every performance metric imaginable. And what a leap it is, almost 20% on average, but as high as a 50% improvement in some games, performing brilliantly in games like CSGO. That's incredible, given that Zen 2 was no slouch. I think if we had to choose between single or multi-core improvements, single is the more appealing since it benefits everything, while multi-core is a bit more limited in what it can be used for, and how well it can scale in most applications. So in that regard, Zen 3 is what everybody wanted to see, with the possible exception of Intel. What wasn't shown quite so much was the multi-threaded performance gains. They're there, but when most workloads have improved less than the IPC boost would have suggested, Zen 3 is almost underwhelming in this regard when compared with previous generational leaps. Don't get me wrong, I don't think anybody will care since Ryzen is already very strong in multi-core applications, which Zen 3 will only improve on further still, all the while keeping to the same power envelopes as Zen 2 did. But it's clear that with Zen 3 they have deliberately prioritised single-core performance over everything else. To understand this change in direction, we need to compare Zen 3 to the previous generations, and there are two improvements to consider. The first is their IPC, that is, how fast they are at a given clock speed, and the second is the clock speeds. Clock speeds have become a fuzzy metric. With Ryzen in particular, the CPUs are continually changing clock speed. A lot of the time it doesn't run at the top advertised speed, and even when it does, it's usually only with part of the processor. When it's this dynamic, it's difficult to know what clock speed should be used in these sorts of comparisons. But what we can say is that each generation of Ryzen has improved the peak clock speeds further, with the new Zen 3 designs appearing to max out just shy of 5 GHz. Clock speeds are the one advantage that Intel has had, but very soon AMD may be able to join them in delivering 5 GHz processors. Again. In terms of IPC, the first generation of Ryzen was the biggest leap, by far. But that's only because it was being compared with AMD's previous architecture based on Bulldozer, which was absolutely terrible in that regard, even at 5 GHz. But that's why the first generation of Ryzen appears to have had the largest IPC improvement. The 2000 series was more of a refinement of the first generation, squeezing a bit more out of the architecture to close the gap with Intel and to tie people over until the real Zen 2. The 3000 series was Zen 2, which scored a very reasonable 16% IPC improvement. In my opinion, this was when they eliminated any disadvantage that Ryzen had against Intel in normal workloads. It was only in gaming that Intel could claim to still have the slight advantage, but even with Zen 2, AMD were claiming some pretty impressive performance improvements in gaming. I can't believe that the 3000 series has been out for a year already. In my mind, they're still brand new and cutting edge. But all that's going to change soon, I guess. Because now, the 5000 series is coming with another 19% IPC improvement, which settles once and for all that Ryzen is the fastest. And that 19% builds on top of a good starting point, compared with the first generation of Ryzen, which came from a dark, dark place indeed. In a way, Zen 3's focus on single-threaded performance is a logical progression. Back with Bulldozer, AMD relied solely on more cores to compete with Intel. They were selling 8-core CPUs for the same cost as a 4-core Intel, and even then, AMD lost in all but the most optimized of multi-threaded workloads. The architecture gave up so much single-core performance that in most tasks, Bulldozer just wasn't fast enough to be acceptable. Sure, AMD eventually refined and improved it, but it was only with Ryzen that AMD got anywhere close to being competitive with Intel again. In my opinion, while Zen 1, 1.5 and 2 may have had a slightly lower IPC than Intel, they were still good enough and offered more cores or threads at any given price point, which in my opinion made them the more attractive option. But with Zen 3 finally beating Intel for IPC, this might finally stop. Maybe, now that Intel has been beaten in every way, AMD might no longer need to offer more cores or threads, instead happy simply to match Intel's offerings in this regard at any given price point. Hence the focus on their single-core performance this time around, and why their 6-core processors cost more than they did 3 years ago. Oh yes, the pricing. This is the controversial bit. Every tier of processor has seen at least a $50 increase over the Zen 2 launch prices. It still means better performance per dollar than ever before, which I think is what we've got to cling on to here. But I think many have seen this as a betrayal from AMD, being the company that has always delivered more cores for less money, significantly undercutting Intel's offerings across the board. It's almost like, now the tables have turned, and they're ahead of Intel for gaming, that AMD has suddenly opted for the same premium route that Intel enjoyed for years, and it may have eroded some of AMD's goodwill that they had built up with their fans. I think we were hoping that Ryzen would start a core war, with more cores for less money every year. But it's almost like we've gone backwards. In 2017, a 6-core Ryzen 1600 would have cost you $220, and now, 3 years later, their 6-core CPU costs $300. The worst value for money has to be the new 8-core processor. In the past, Ryzen has always had a $330 8-core CPU, so to see them now starting at $450 feels like quite a jump in price. In fact, it's so expensive you might as well spend $100 more and get the 12-core part instead. And I think that's deliberate, to make beyond 8 cores the norm, but to make you pay for the privilege. And it's not like it's an area where Intel can compete, since their current processors max out at 10 cores. To be honest, unless you really have to have the best, I see this as being a great opportunity to pick up some discounted Zen 2 processors. While Zen 3 is obviously better, the older Ryzen 3000 series is still an excellent all-round choice with no real weaknesses to speak of, which is just as well, because you won't be getting Zen 3 for anything less than $300. I expect 4 core offerings, and hopefully cheaper 6 and 8 core tiered parts, to come out later in response to Intel's counterattack, which it looks like AMD has left product and price gaps for. As always, wait for benchmarks. In another video, I'm hoping to cover Big Navi, which was also teased of in the Zen presentation, and although less was said about it, I have more to say about it, so expect a bigger video about that shortly.